I'm Lee Kim, and today I have with me three friends, Chung, Pastor David, and Abby. What we're going to talk about is interesting. It's basically the state of Tibetan affairs. So let's see. The Dalai Lama fled Tibet in 1959, and since then he's been championing the cause of a free Tibet, which I understand as China to return Tibet to him, back to him and his government, right? 59 years later, we haven't seen, there is progress, but maybe not about that cause. They're not close to getting back Tibet, and things aren't as rosy as everyone would like it to be. So I think it would be a good time now for us to kind of talk about what's going on now in Tibet, what's happening with the Tibetans, and what it looks like for the future.
Yeah, things have certainly changed from when the Dalai Lama fled Tibet, 1959. It looks like when he first fled Tibet to India, and I think it was President Nehru who welcomed him to India at that time. The reason for India and the Western countries receiving him in a very friendly way,
Open arms,
welcoming him, and in later years making him like the icon of peace, compassion, human rights, was because, if you remember, the Western countries were fighting against communists back then. So in supporting the Dalai Lama, in welcoming him, in making him an icon, the West was actually indirectly having this war of words,
war of words? Okay.
War of words, war of image, that, they were holding a higher moral ground compared with China or even Russia at that point in time.
Okay, so you're saying that taking a higher moral ground, they used, lack of a better word, right? They used the Dalai Lama as the, what did you say, icon, mascot?
Icon, victim.
Victim,
yeah.
Ayo.
Yeah.
Okay, so that they all kind of look good, like championing. But the thing is, I don't think anyone sent in any, troops to help, come, let us work with you, let's take back your land from China. I don't think so. Why is that?
That's because it's very simple. That time, especially prior to the takeover, Tibet.
Don't you like the word invasion?
Invasion.
So hostile. Yeah.
So what happened was, before that, Tibet was relatively a hermit country, kingdom, ruled by the Dalai Lama, and so they had hardly any international relations with any countries. So when the takeover came, invasion, whatever it is, you would call it.
When they lost their land.
Exactly. So when they asked for help, no one came to their aid, unfortunately. They didn't see that there was a need, or they didn't know much about Tibet. It was this mysterious place. So what happened was nobody came. So in the end, what happened was the Dalai himself had to flee Tibet into exile into India. From there, he started his campaign to free Tibet, which from the start, it was easy because he had, as Chung had mentioned, his moral high ground, and he had the world supporting, especially the Western countries, the free world, as they say, against communism. So there was some kind of a backdrop.
So he was kind of like, so what you're saying is, what the both of you are saying is, they used the situation with China taking over Tibet and having this monk having to run and hide, so to speak. So they used that situation to kind of poke at China for being lack of human rights.
Yeah, remember also during that same decade, what was happening in Southeast Asia was that America was involved first in the Vietnam War, then in the Korean War. So it's they were too busy. They didn't have resources to spread around. You know, the circumstances at that point in time, like Pastor David said, Tibet had no prior exposure or diplomatic relations. So it was very difficult for anyone to justify, you know, stepping in militarily into Tibet to try.
What did you just say?
Militarily.
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 Oh, didn't send in the troops.
Yeah, didn't send in the troops, yeah.
militarily. Okay, so so what's the situation now, though? I mean, what's happening? I mean, you have Tibetans in exile, and then you have those who remained in Tibet, China. So, what's happening with the Tibetans these days?
Okay, 59 years down the road. Okay, let's look within the Tibetan settlements in India, because when they entered into India, they formed some settlements, land that was given by the Indian government for them to reside. And what happened was, at the beginning, it was good in the sense that the Dalai Lama was able to travel and made a name for himself, because he was kind of like the champion of free Tibet. And but things have changed since then. So within the Tibetan communities, it was at the beginning, a lot of Tibetans were escaping across the border, but that seemed to have trickled down in recent years.
Yes.
Trickle down means getting less and less.
Yeah, but before that, Pastor David, I'm a money man.
Really?
Well, I was. I've retired. So,
You got any money for them?
So one point that I would like to make is that, say in the last 30 years since the Dalai Lama fled Tibet, it was very easy for them to
59 years.
well, the first 30 years, maybe 40 years, it was very easy for them to raise funds. You know, they played a victim card, you know, holding moral high ground. It was very easy for them to raise funds, and they did, because they set up lots of organizations globally, in the rich countries, which were very successful in raising funds for Tibetans in exile. And these are not
in supporting the Tibetan cause at that time.
That's correct. Not only from private citizens, but also from governments. You know? So they were very well funded for the first 40, 50 years.
So the people did, shall we say, enjoy a period of settling down in a new place, security, safety, even stability for a while. Yeah?
I want to add to what Pastor David said. Actually, the Central Tibetan Administration, the spokesperson, his name is Sonam Nobu Dakpo. He confirms that there are fewer Tibetans coming into India from the Tibet. So it's because China is, how to say, the Tibet situation in China is getting better. So less and less Tibetans travel to India, because last time they want to travel to India because they are seeking for a better life. But now fewer Tibetans are coming into India. This is confirmed by the Central Tibetan Administration itself.
So let me get it straight. 59 years later, there's less people wanting to leave Tibet, China, to India.
Yes.
And to the contrary, you have them actually leaving India to go elsewhere.
Yes.
Why is that? I mean, conditions, have they deteriorated since the time when you said it was better? How?
Yeah, one of the factors is the status of the land where the settlements are located.
Oh.
Because in 1959, when they moved to India, India was very kind enough to allocate land to them. But these were for 99-year lease. Yeah, and if you do the math, it's now
It's quite short left.
maybe 30 years left. So I would be worried about that. You know, if the land you are actually on is so uncertain moving forward.
And I think also they have maintained refugee status. They didn't become Indian citizens. I mean, not all became Indian citizens. Does that have a play on opportunities and employment or career opportunities? Does that give them less of a benefit or advantage because of their situation?
You brought up a very good point. within the Tibetan community, they've been like hoping to return to Tibet for such a long time. So the situation has deteriorated quite badly in the sense that a lot of people have given up hope. And so they have always been on the mode where they are refugees and they're championing this. It's 59 years is about how many, 2 generations perhaps?
Yeah.
It's a long time.
And it's a very long time to maintain this hope.
So you're saying that, so what you're saying is they didn't become or opt to become Indian citizens because they wanted to maintain the refugee status, because in their head, in their hearts, they were going home.
That's right.
So whatever arrangement now was very
Yes.
temporary.
For many years, there was actually great hope to return to Tibet. I think, if I'm not mistaken, right up till the 1980s, whereby there was actually, Nechung, the state oracle, took trance, and Nechung basically indicated that within 5 years, the Tibetans exile will actually return to Tibet.
Would have made it
China,
1990.
by 1990.
1991.
Yeah.
right.
So can you imagine from 1959 right up to 1990, no one did anything to better themselves or to plant themselves more solidly in India or even becoming Indian citizens.
So that's why we can see that Amchok Rinpoche, that is the previous personal biographer of Dalai Lama and also a confidant of the Dalai Lama, returned to Tibet in 2016, and he took up the Chinese citizenship. So a person so close to the Dalai Lama also loses hope. So you can see that he returned to Tibet and took up the Chinese citizenship, and this tells a lot of how great the disappointment and hopeless he is, or most of the Tibetans are.
Without Indian citizenship, the Tibetans in India cannot work for Indian organizations
They
or
don't have
outside
an
their
equal
settlement.
opportunity kind of thing. So they kind of just have to stay confined
That's right.
within their settlements.
So if
And
you-
what kind of jobs I visited, without sounding insulting, they sell sweaters, they art and craft, things like that. Nothing.
Because of the government policies, the Tibetan government policy in exile, CTA, their policies they are all basically on the verge, they're always planning to return to Tibet actually. They have never encouraged much human development within the community, so unemployment is extremely high. And as a result, for the young next generation of Tibetans coming out, a lot of them, not that there's anything wrong with sweater sellers, but that's the norm. And then a lot of hosts of social issues that comes out of it.
So you actually have a deterioration of standard of living.
Yes.
So that's gonna, if you're saying that unemployment is high, then the next thing that we can assume is that children are also probably not going to school, or maybe there's more school dropouts or less opportunity to go to school or something like that.
Well, the present day situation is such, because when they first settled down in India, the schools and all that and monasteries were catering to an influx of Tibetans, which has now dried up. And in fact, the Tibetans in India themselves
Are leaving India, yes. Because you can see on one article posted on Hindustan Time on the 5th of April, it says that the Central Tibetan Administration themselves...
5th of April this year, 2018.
Yes,
okay.
they confirms the trend that many Tibetans are leaving India and migrating to the West, and now actually there are more Tibetans are choosing to go back to Tibet. So the government itself is emitting this kind of trend.
So today you see empty schools.
Not because there's no schools provided, but people are there's no population to attend.
That's right.
Right.
Yes, the people leaving, and then there are people leaving, and no new Tibetans are coming from China, Tibet.
This will also affect monasteries. That means there's also no new people joining the monasteries.
It's the same for monasteries. In fact, from what we know, the enrollment in monasteries consists more and more Nepali, and also
Ladakhi,
Yeah.
Indians.
Nepali,
Indians, those from northern India.
So, if that's the situation, and also sadly, we also read a lot of news with the Dalai Lama not being as welcome as he used to be before.
Yeah.
I think there
That's
have
true.
been some incidences where
Yeah.
his visits were turned
Definitely.
down.
For the most recent case, I think the French president, Mr. Macron. So he said that to meet the Dalai Lama without consulting Beijing government will trigger a crisis with China relationship. So it is quite serious thing to meet the Dalai Lama. And in 2017, which is last year, the Australian Prime Minister, Mr. Tsem also said that he decided not to meet the Dalai Lama. And many more countries like Taiwan also barred Dalai Lama from entering the island on 2012. Also, Mongolia is like
I remember
have the same thing, right?
I remember the Mongolian episode.
Oh, yeah, I heard it was quite bad.
Because Mongolian had this financial crisis because it spent too much money investing during the boom years of the minerals. And when prices came down, they were saddled with a huge amount of debt. And China actually came to help because China has lots of money, I presume.
Such strong statements.
But the funny thing is that after China came in to help them, they had the gall to actually allow His Holiness Dalai Lama to visit Mongolia.
And I think Mongolia suffered a little bit of, shall we say, scolding or something. The Chinese did react.
Yes.
Yeah.
And threatened to
And because of
withdraw
that-
financial aid, right?
Yes, and because of that, today the Dalai Lama is actually not welcome in
Yes,
Mongolia.
since 2016, and he is not welcome even for the religious purposes. And we know that Dalai Lama and Mongolia are very close. I think since many lifetimes, they are
I
very
think-
close.
Also, you were mentioning this the other day. Even the support from the Indian government towards the Tibetan refugees is also declining.
Yeah, that one is quite interesting because that's a recent development earlier this year when the Foreign Secretary Vijay Kokali issued a memo regarding withdrawing, requesting the government officials to not attend a big Tibetan Indian celebration called a Thank You India celebration.
Okay. That
So-
means the Tibetans were
Thanking
Tibetan
India.
Thanking India.
Thanking India
Okay.
for hosting them for almost 60
So
years.
it was the Tibetan government organizing an event to say thank you, India.
A huge event that's supposed to host in a stadium that can fit 5,600 people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it started from there because what happened was the event was a
Stadium
wide,
size.
stadium size event
Meant for stadium size.
in Delhi, in New
Right.
Delhi, the capital of India.
Yes.
But it was cancelled and relegated to Dharamsala, where it was a much scaled down event.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so that
That's
was
a real
basically
slap in the face.
that was a snub. That was a
Big
snub.
one. Big one. Okay.
So what happened was because of that, there was other reaction as well, other things that were cancelled. Aside from the Thank You India celebration, there was the parliamentarian.
Yeah, there was
thing
a.
that-
The world-
They had scheduled a world parliamentarian meeting on Tibet, sometime late April 25th, if I'm not mistaken. And
This year.
This year.
And when was
yeah,
the last one?
1995. So it was going to be a big one because they haven't had it for a very long time.
And even that was
that was
cancelled.
cancelled too.
And the Tibetan Uprising, they get the protests also cancelled in India, and also as well as in Nepal, the Tibetan
Hold
Uprising
on.
Day.
Let me. There so many occasions. The Tibetan Uprising Day is not a protest day, though. The original.
It was a commemoration of, actually it was a commemoration of when, during the Chinese time, when they were still in China, they surrounded the Summer Palace, Nobulinka, to protect the Dalai Lama. And it became a symbol of freedom for Tibet. And what happened was, usually on that day, in recent years, it has been a day of protest.
Right.
So what they do,
Protests against the China. Yeah.
So freedom
Yeah,
of Tibet
freedom.
protest. So what happened was,
Which is protest against China lah.
Yeah.
You're so politically correct he is.
so what happened was, India cancelled or does not allow any form of protest.
Nepal too.
Yes,
Nepal
as well
for a
as
second,
Nepal.
yeah.
Government also doing the same thing, and there's a one Tibetan man. He hold a Tibetan flag, and
Where is
just
this? In Nepal?
In Nepal, and then he took a picture, and then he was arrested because of this. Because now Nepal and China are getting very close to each other because Nepal needs help from China. So Nepal definitely doesn't want to offend China by allowing Tibetan creating issues in Nepal.
China today is not China in 1959, not China in 1970, not even 1980. You know,
So what is China now?
China today stands shoulder to shoulder with the largest economies of the world, like America.
That's true.
So obviously, you know, if you are a big boy on the street, everyone needs to be friends with you.
They have financial strength, and they also have the so-called the population to give it a volume on consumption too. Yeah.
Yeah, for example, Mercedes-Benz, I think earlier this year they have an advertisement and they quote words from the Dalai Lama. And the Chinese people saw this and they get very angry because they said, how can you support the Dalai Lama and quoting his words? So the Mercedes-Benz, because they want to secure their business in China, they had the Mercedes-Benz
Had to apologize.
Yes, apologize to China. And not only Mercedes-Benz, big companies like JW, Marriott, and Gap, and all this, they also apologize to China because they list Taiwan and Hong Kong as a country. So to China, Taiwan and Hong Kong are their territory. It's not a country. It's not an independent country. So this offend Chinese also, and the Chinese people. It's actually the netizen is getting angry. It's not even the government is angry. So they really want to secure the business in China, and they apologize.
So they
for
apologize.
This. Yes.
So there is the China issue. It's huge, amounting a huge pressure. The problems within the Tibetan society, social politics, rather the Tibetan government, the issues that they have. And then there's one more very big thing that plays on Tibetan mentality within the settlement is that the Dalai Lama himself, because he is not young. You see, in Tibetan society, the Dalai is the king, or rather the sole refuge for the Tibetan people, because that's how they see the Dalai Lama. They see him as an emanation of Chenrezig. They see him as also a human being. And what happened is he's also the symbol of Tibetan freedom. And he is aging. And because of that, a lot of people are fearful. And it often evokes, because when there's news and, you know, that when he goes and see the doctor, you know, people are afraid
So there's a sense of insecurity that should anything happen to him, they are left without a leader to fight their cause.
Exactly.
Because the government itself also having a lot of problem. I'm talking about Central Tibetan Administration. I heard that there are quite a lot of scandals. Maybe Chong can tell us.
Yeah.
Tell us
You
a little
like
bit.
money and you like scandals. Come on.
They come
Yeah, they come together, right?
Yeah.
No, money and sex, always
Wow.
the scandals.
That too, yeah. Yeah, scandals-wise, it's been a busy year. I think two things stand out as far as scandals is concerned. One is the emissary for the Dalai Lama, Tenzin Donden, was actually asked to resign. I'm not sure whether he was fired or not, you know, it wasn't very explicit, but he stepped down from his position in some of the Dalai Lama's organizations in America. And the reason for that was that people had been pointing out that, you know, as a monk, he shouldn't be
Engaged in inappropriate activities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're a
know
lady, so you.
I know you were
put it-
dying to use the sex word, right? Okay. All right. Uh-huh.
So that's one. There was also this scandal that was uncovered by Penpa Sering, who was the previous speaker of the
Speaker of the
Tibetan
House.
Parliament. Yeah, he was, I think, 2 years ago appointed to be the Dalai Lama's representative to North America. After he took his position in America, he was going through all the papers that they had and discovered that one of the financial transactions between the Office of Tibet and the Tibet Fund was not correct. What he saw was not correct because on paper it was treated as a loan very clearly. But yet when the people in the Office of Tibet talks about it, they talk about it in terms of actually a grant. So he was the one who sort of blew the whistle on this.
What was the disturbing amount he blew down?
1.5 million US dollars. Yeah,
That's
which
a
was
lot of money
which was used to
to
buy
be
the
confused
office.
between a loan and a grant.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and the accounts were actually audited, so you can't say that it's this or that. It has to be one.
So what happened?
Yeah.
He get fired?
He got fired by the present leadership of the CTA,
That's not very nice.
and most recently I've read that he's.
What are you, a stalker? He is scandal stalker.
Yeah, I find all these things very interesting because it's very pertinent if you are trying to forecast, what's going to happen next. And he has actually filed a lawsuit against the CTA.
Let's see how that pans out. So you have a situation with China growing, things not that great for the refugees in India. They're either going back to Tibet, China, or they're leaving to go elsewhere, like Switzerland, France, Canada. And it's quite scary. I mean, the Tibetan people are really getting all scattered.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the recent news, which may even add on the insecurity and fear onto the Tibetans in exile in India, is the reset between India and China.
Yes.
Who would like to, okay, between the two of you, I know one of you is dying to talk about it.
Yeah,
Let's start.
since Pastor David talked about the
Thank you.
banning, thank you, India.
Yeah.
It happened at the same time, so
Oh, dear.
it's no coincidence that it happened at the same time, because for many years now there's not been very good relationship between India and China, but there was pressure for them to reset the relationship, but it did not happen till recently, and that coincided with the memo from the Foreign Secretary Gokhale.
It's kind of pretty, it's self-explanatory, you have, you start to repair relations, with China. There's no way there's going to be much approvals for Tibetan matters.
It really looks like the Indian government and the Chinese government have already made their decision to repair relationships and move, forward, and which resulted in the Prime Minister Modi's visit to Kunming, Wuhan, to visit President Xi Jinping.
Yeah, it was all
Actually,
covered in the news.
On that note, there's also something else to that effect, which is there's a growing resentment from the Indians themselves.
Okay, so we're not on governments now, we're just talking about the
just
regular population. Okay.
That's right. So in order to illustrate that, I'll show you what I experienced when I enter into a Tibetan settlement in
You
India.
mean the Indian nationals are having a growing resentment towards the Tibetan refugees?
Yes.
Oh.
So what happened was when I was on the way to Bailakuppe, one of the Tibetan settlements in southern India, outside of the settlement, it was what you would expect from an Indian village, where it was poor, it was run down, and I mean, you expect that.
Poverty-stricken.
In a sense. So, but the moment you enter into the Tibetan settlement, where it's supposed to be a refugee place, right? The Tibetans are technically refugees, although that's not what the Indian government calls them. But you don't feel that. You don't feel that when I enter, I see houses with big compounds with high walls. I see satellite dishes on top of bungalow houses. I see good schools with gates with the names in Tibetan and English, Tibetan Children's Village. And
So you see money.
Yes, and I well, the purpose I went to the Tibetan summit was actually to visit the monasteries. And then when you enter the monastery, it's gilded, it's painted. There's Buddha statues, gilded in gold, big donation boxes. You see lots of monks. You see,
And they do receive quite a lot of donations from from
within the
lo-
Tibetan community,
and also overseas.
yeah, so this plays on the Indians, because how come these Tibetans have leaped over the Indians, improved economically over the Indians throughout all these years? So, and they're supposed to be refugees. They don't have rights. They don't pay taxes. They don't have a lot of the rights as of an Indian national, you know. So this is what the Indians see. And then on top of that, there's the reset of India-China relations. And of course, to a lot of Indians, what's the stumbling block? To Tibetans. Because this is the thorn at the side of China, you see. So a lot of this play into the Indian psychology, and there have been backlash on the internet, on social media, as well as what I've heard of is a recent protest in the state of Arunachal Pradesh late last year, 2017.
A protest against,
The Tibetans,
that means wanting
they're
them to
not
leave.
happy with them being in India.
Oh dear.
That's right. So they're not happy with them being in India and receiving this sort of aid from being, refugees.
So, in light of everything that we've shared here, where's the future?
That's a very good question.
What is your opinion?
I see, that's why a lot of Tibetans have been losing hope.
Yeah.
And a sign of that is a lot of them are leaving. And they see also that the Tibetans are doing much better in China, Tibet. So a lot of them have been trying to get back into China, Tibet. A lot of them also have been trying to go to other countries. Some have naturalized as Indian citizens. A lot of them have gone to Nepal. But overall, I think the best, in the interests of Tibetan culture, religion.
Yeah, preserving culture, what else? Religion, language, traditions.
That's right.
Yeah.
Would be to go back to Tibet.
Because I think at the rate they're going, leaving and dispersing, can you imagine little pockets of Tibetan communities around the world? It's not very united.
Yes.
You know, I think people, a population should be together, and I think that gives strength in unity.
It's very practical to think that, as a Tibetan, actually China would actually be the best place to locate yourself, because you have friends, relatives, you have connections.
Yeah.
You also have the numbers, and the ability to, like you say, keep your traditions, your culture, your language,
your religion.
all that comes with being Tibetan.
And then I think if that happens and the Dalai Lama does return to Tibet, he can reconnect back with his people.
And the Dalai Lama does want to go back to Tibet, and he has been saying this since, I think, many years back. I think recently he said it more and more. And I think it is the best, like the two of them said, the best is to return to Tibet.
Recently, not only the Dalai Lama said it again and more emphatically, but he was actually echoed by the president of the CTA, Losang Sangye, who quoted the dream that the Dalai Lama, the three dreams that the Dalai Lama had. And the last one was being back in Potala Palace.
And meet the Tibetans there.
Meeting the Tibetans. So the president of the CTA actually talked about this a lot in the press recently.
But it's going to take a lot more just talk by the CTA if they are going to honor the wishes of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I think that the CTA will have to stop all this nonsense against China. the
Yes.
things they say, what they do, and tying in the Chinese spy thing with Dorje Shugden practitioners.
They have to
It
unite
just-
the Tibetans.
Yeah, it's just starting to look really, really ugly with more and more topics for divide. Why does China want to have anything to do with you if everything you do just divide and cause disharmony and discord? You know what I mean?
Like Karmapa, the Tibetans in India have 3 Karmapas. It's very
Yeah,
dividing.
you have 3 Karmapas,
Yeah.
you have 2 Panchen Lamas.
Yes. Then you have
Yeah.
Dorje Shugden controversy, again, that keeps separating the Tibetans. And the
Oh, yeah.
regionalism also.
And the Rangzen versus
Umelam.
and the Rangzen versus Umelam thing. Yeah?
Regionalism also one thing. Amdo don't like the Kampa, and then Utsang
Yeah.
don't like Kampa.
Yeah.
All this thing.
But it doesn't matter what Umelam, Rangzen, freedom or self-autonomy for Tibet, their language has always been antagonistic against China.
Yeah.
So that must
Yeah,
change.
that must change. Because who would welcome? I mean, who's going to welcome somebody who's going to bite your hand into your home?
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't make sense.
And in fact, His Holiness Dalai Lama actually recently made sort of like an opening gesture, opening statement, if you like it, because he actually acknowledged that, in a roundabout way, acknowledged that there are actually 2 emanations of the Panchen Lamas,
Oh yes.
including the Chinese appointed one.
And he, I think in that video, he did say that the Chinese recognize Panchen Lama as the official Panchen Lama.
Yeah, and he's receiving a good education from a good teacher.
And that the other Panchen Lama recognized by His Holiness the Dalai Lama is well,
Yes.
and also receiving a
No-
good
mo-
education.
normal education.
Modern,
Yeah.
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 Correct.
So the mending of the relationships between the Tibetans in exile and China has, to me, definitely started.
It has,
And
but
led by His Holiness himself.
Correct.
So what are the rest of the Tibetans doing
correct,
about it?
correct. You know, I mean, they can't let the Dalai Lama do all the work. You know, CTA has to back the Dalai Lama by behaving themselves. You know what I mean? I guess we all agree that to preserve the Tibetan people, culture, tradition, language, religion, that for now, given the fact that 59 years, they're not anywhere close to achieving their cause, maybe it's time to review that cause, change it with time, because obviously 59 years later, things have changed. You can see, North Korea, South Korea meeting. I mean, whoever thought that? Mm-hmm. You have India and China looking to reset relations. And I think it's also a time that maybe CTA should look at healing the divides within the Tibetan people as well. And for us, of course, it's always the Dorje Shugden issue. So I guess we all wish for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for his wishes to come true. And may there be unity and harmony for the Tibetan people returning to Tibet, to preserve, most of all, language, culture, tradition, and religion. Thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed yourself like we have.
Thank you, Nikim.